Hagane no renkinjutsushi. Humankind cannot gain anything without first giving something in return. To obtain, something of equal value must be lost. That is alchemy's first law of equivalent exchange. In those days, we really believed that to be the world's one and only truth. Fullmetal Alchemist won the TV feature award in the 9th Animation Kobe Awards and was one of the jury-recommended works in the 2004 Japan Media Arts Festival in the anime division. As the manga was still ongoing at the time, the anime midway through diverged from the manga. This led to it having an anime-only ending, unlike Fullmetal Alchemist, Brotherhood, which would air years later. Synopsis: Edward Elric, a young, brilliant alchemist, has lost much in his 12-year life. When he and his brother Alphonse try to resurrect their dead mother through the forbidden act of human transmutation, Edward loses his brother as well as 2 of his limbs. With his supreme alchemy skills, Edward binds Alphonse's soul to a large suit of armor. A year later, Edward, now promoted to the Fullmetal Alchemist of the state, embarks on a journey with his younger brother to obtain the Philosopher's Stone. The fabled mythical object is rumored to be capable of amplifying an alchemist's abilities by leaps and bounds, thus allowing them to override the fundamental law of alchemy. To gain something, an alchemist must sacrifice something of equal value. Edward hopes to draw into the military's resources to find the fabled stone and restore his and Alphonse's bodies to normal. However, the Elric brothers soon discover that there is more to the legendary stone than meets the eye, as they are led to the epicenter of a far darker battle than they could have ever imagined. Character: 8 out of 10. For such a large cast, Fullmetal manages to characterize most of the characters to a decent extent. But the most well-developed characters are without a doubt Edward and Alphonse, and their selfless brotherly relationship. What I see Ed as is the shounen archetype, loudmouthed, hot-headed, and proud, but done right, and with more depth than any of his counterparts. Despite his quirks and his stereotypical shounen characteristics, acting arrogant? Check. Hot-blooded personality? Check. Childhood romantic interest? Check. Ed has proven to be an extremely mature character, with the resolve to do whatever it takes to protect his brother. Besides Ed and Al, Mustang also has a very well-written background to his character and shows that, in actuality, his arrogant personality is just a facade to cover up for his doubt in what he did in his past. Now the main quirk I have with the cast of Fullmetal is the lack of development for the antagonists. There's such a colorful cast of characters, and yet we know little or nothing about them. Yes, we have Scar, who's pretty well characterized, but what about lust, greed, and gluttony? They may be artificial beings, but they should have their own history and character, right? The series only manages to touch on those characters and give us a small taste of the stories of the homunculi. Aside from that, overall the good side of the cast is pretty well developed, while the homunculi are developed to only the minimal extent, which is passable considering this was an adaptation of the manga when it was still in its early stages. And while I do commend the anime team that worked on Fullmetal to cook up its own original villain, I find her to be extremely uninspired, incompetent, generic, and just a poorly done villain in general. Art: Fullmetal Alchemist was made by Studio Bones, and is probably the show most responsible for the seemingly endless pockets of money that the studio had for many years. But this was an early work, so it's not exactly perfect. The show didn't have all that much of a budget to work with, and there were times when it showed inconsistent character designs, jagged edges, and 1 or 2 episodes in particular that looked fairly cheap. But the show is still overall a good-looking show. What impressed me most was probably the shading in it, and how perfectly it was used to represent different emotions and foreshadowing. The character facial designs also helped this, done well enough at times that 2 characters could just share a scene together, with 0 dialogue, and in just one stare, convey all the emotions they need to get across. Of course, this is a battle series, and you can tell that this is where a good chunk of the budget was spent, with fluid animation and splendid choreographing that kept your eyes firmly glued to the screen. Fullmetal Alchemist is a good-looking show with some dents here and there, but the moments of brilliance shine right though. Sound. The soundtrack is comprised completely of orchestral pieces, all of which complement their scenes quite well. It's in the background, always noticeable but never overpowering, a perfect accompaniment to the show. But to tell the truth, nothing on the OST really sticks out on its own, and it's not really a soundtrack that you listen to on its own. A good soundtrack nonetheless, but nothing spectacular. If I was only judging the sound based off the soundtrack, then I'd probably only give it a 7 or 8 out of 10. But there's one more important thing to talk about. The dub. This was an early Funimation show, but I'm guessing that they knew ahead of time how big the show would be, because they really brought their A game for it. Talking about Vic Mignogna as Edward Elric is almost as redundant as telling people about the plot to FMA. He's great as the role, and it's the #1 reason why he has so many fangirls. Plus, this was also the show that launched Travis Willingham's career for his performance as Roy Mustang, which is well deserved. And I'd be remiss to not mention Christopher Sabat's performance as Major Alex Louis Armstrong, who just does the role complete justice, as though IT was a performance handed down the Armstrong family for generations. There are plenty of other big names, like Johnny Young Bosch and Lucy Christensen playing for small roles, which are always nice to hear. But the thing that really impressed me about the dub is that they had actual kids playing the kids, including a 12-year-old Aaron Dismuke doing a bang-up job in his first performance as Alphonse Elric. It's definitely a show worth checking out dubbed. One of the resonating themes that went on throughout the series was the importance of life and being human. Living was important to Ed and Al, and it was the same for their enemies. I also like how they said that life, or the world, isn't perfect, but that's why it's so beautiful. There's also the importance of family. The characters, especially those with brothers, were all very family-oriented, which is something you don't see in the real world. It'll make you cherish your family more. Thank you for subscribing to the channel and liking the video.